Let's get started. Important safety disclaimer. This is extremely dangerous and should never be attempted in real life. Going 90 days without talking to anyone represents severe social isolation that can cause permanent psychological damage. Medical literature shows that prolonged isolation can trigger depression, anxiety, hallucinations, and suicidal thoughts. This video is purely educational. If you're considering any form of extreme isolation, please consult mental health professionals instead. To understand the horror that awaits you in 90 days of silence, you first need to grasp what communication actually does for your survival. Human beings are obligate social animals, meaning we didn't just evolve to prefer company, we biologically require social interaction to maintain basic health. Your brain contains specialized neural networks dedicated entirely to social processing, with language centers like Broca's area and Wernicke's area intricately connected to regions controlling emotion, memory, and physical coordination. When you speak, you're activating a symphony of over 100 muscles in your chest, neck, jaw, tongue, and lips. Your vocal cords, two delicate bands of muscle tissue in your larynx, vibrate between 100 to 300 times per second, creating the fundamental frequency of your voice. But communication goes far beyond making sounds. During positive social interactions, your brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which reduces stress hormones like cortisol, lowers blood pressure, and strengthens your immune system. Research shows that social interaction activates your brain's reward centers the same way food and water do. From an evolutionary perspective, social connection has been just as crucial to human survival as nutrition. The neural pathways supporting speech and social cognition are like muscles. Without regular use, they begin to atrophy. Your voice itself serves as a primary method of emotional self-regulation. That internal dialogue you use to solve problems, it's called private speech, and it's crucial for executive function and emotional control. By cutting off all communication, you're not just being quiet, you're severing the primary input cable to your brain's social processing centers and initiating a profound neurological starvation experiment. Within the first few hours of complete silence, your brain begins registering that something is fundamentally wrong. You might feel deceptively peaceful initially, but your body's expectations quickly clash with this new reality. Your brain is a prediction machine that anticipates vocalizations when you see friends or experience frustration. Actively suppressing these urges engages your prefrontal cortex in an exhausting inhibitory task. You'll notice a strange tightness in your throat, partly psychosomatic from suppressed speech impulses, but also the beginning of muscle tension as you consciously hold your vocal apparatus still. Without your own voice to modulate your auditory environment, your brain turns up the gain on your hearing, making the world sound louder and more abrasive. You become hyper-aware of sounds you normally ignore: breathing, swallowing, footsteps. Everything feels amplified. Your brain's default mode network, heavily involved in social cognition, starts working overtime. Internal dialogue intensifies dramatically as your brain tries to maintain communication pathways without external stimulation. You'll find yourself having elaborate mental conversations, replaying past interactions, or rehearsing things you'd like to say. By the end of day one, the psychological friction begins in earnest. Without the ability to vent frustration verbally or connect with others for emotional co-regulation, cortisol levels in your blood start rising measurably. You'll experience increased irritability and restlessness as your stress response system activates. Even brief periods of social isolation can trigger these physiological changes. Sleep becomes your first major casualty. Social cues actually help regulate your circadian rhythm, and without the natural emotional discharge of conversation, your brain struggles to power down. You may lie awake with your internal monologue racing at double speed, a rebound effect where your brain floods you with words at night to compensate for daytime suppression. Physically, your vocal cords enter a state of enforced rest. While short-term vocal rest can be beneficial for recovery from strain, total disuse for 48 hours begins lowering the viscosity of protective mucus on your vocal folds. You might feel persistent dryness or a tickle that coughing doesn't clear. The constant mental effort of fighting your communication instincts drains glucose reserves, leaving you feeling lethargic despite reduced physical activity. Congratulations! If you somehow made it to day 5, you've entered genuinely dangerous psychological territory. By the end of the first week, you're experiencing what researchers document in solitary confinement studies: significant cognitive deterioration. Concentration becomes frustratingly difficult, because your brain expends enormous energy dealing with isolation stress and the absence of social stimulation. Your emotional regulation breaks down completely. Without natural emotional processing through conversation, talking through problems, sharing experiences, receiving validation, emotions become extreme and uncontrollable. You might cry over minor frustrations or experience disproportionate anger because the prefrontal cortex becomes less effective when deprived of social interaction. The physical effects on your voice become pronounced. The intrinsic muscles of your larynx, including the cricothyroid muscle that adjusts pitch and the thyroarytenoid muscle controlling cord tension, begin atrophying from disuse. Attempting to speak now would result in hoarseness, difficulty controlling volume, and reduced vocal range. Your brain structure itself starts changing. Neuroimaging studies show measurable decreases in gray matter volume in regions associated with social cognition and emotional regulation. The hippocampus, crucial for memory formation, shows stress-related damage. Most alarmingly, hallucinations can begin during this phase. Your brain, desperate for social input, starts creating its own, hearing voices, imagining conversations, or sensing presences that aren't there. Entering the danger zone at week 2, you're now experiencing chronic social isolation with measurable health consequences. Your immune system has weakened significantly. Studies show that loneliness increases inflammation markers and reduces immune effectiveness. You're more susceptible to infections, and recovery from illness becomes slower. Your cardiovascular system suffers under sustained stress. Chronic cortisol elevation combined with absent oxytocin protection means persistently elevated blood pressure and decreased heart rate variability, a key cardiovascular health marker. Research indicates that chronic social isolation carries health risks comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes daily. Visible changes emerge that others would notice immediately. Your facial expressions become flat or blunted because we unconsciously mirror expressions during conversation. Without that interaction, facial muscles lose dynamic responsiveness, creating a mask-like appearance. Your posture may slump as motivation and energy decline. The vocal deterioration continues relentlessly. Speech-language pathologists note that even a few weeks of complete vocal rest can require extensive rehabilitation. Your vocal folds develop stiffness, and the delicate collagen fibers lose flexibility. If you coughed or sneezed, it would be startlingly painful due to tight, unconditioned muscles. Depression and anxiety have likely set in deeply. The absence of social connection triggers the same brain regions that process physical pain. You're experiencing the neurological equivalent of chronic pain. Suicidal ideation becomes common at this level of isolation, even when entered voluntarily. Crossing the 1-month mark, you enter territory where brain structure changes become substantial. Neuroplasticity works against you as neural pathways for speech and social processing are pruned away from disuse, while anxiety and threat detection pathways strengthen. The prefrontal cortex shows significant thinning in imaging studies, while the amygdala becomes hyperactive and enlarged, changes mirroring severe anxiety disorders and PTSD. Your personality itself begins changing. People who experience prolonged isolation report feeling fundamentally different afterward, more paranoid, less trusting, emotionally flatter. The neural pathways supporting normal personality traits are literally being dismantled while stress-related pathways are reinforced. Social anxiety develops to such severity that the mere thought of human interaction induces panic. Your internal monologue, once a stream of consciousness, fragments or loops obsessively. Without reality checks from others, thoughts can become delusional. You might believe you've permanently lost the ability to speak. At this point, medical intervention would be absolutely necessary. The risk of self-harm increases dramatically in extreme isolation conditions. You're living in a self-imposed prison where the walls are the inside of your own skull. Reaching 90 days represents an extreme level of social deprivation approaching conditions the United Nations classifies as torture when extended beyond 15 days in prison settings. The damage to your mental health is severe and potentially permanent. Your voice, if attempted, would be unrecognizable, weak, breathy, and unstable, resembling presbylaryngis-like atrophy usually seen in the very elderly. The coordination required for normal speech, involving precise timing of breath control, vocal cord vibration, and articulatory movements, would be severely impaired. You'd sound like someone recovering from a stroke. Psychologically, you'd likely exhibit symptoms indistinguishable from severe dissociative disorders. The self is constructed largely through interaction with others. By removing that interaction, your sense of identity has eroded. You might feel transparent, insubstantial, like a ghost of your former self. Research on hermits and solitary confinement prisoners shows that after this duration, hallucinations become complex and fully formed. You might engage in elaborate conversations with people who aren't there, desperately satisfying your brain's need for social input. You remain biologically alive, but exist in a critical psychological near-death state. When the experiment finally ends, recovery isn't like flipping a switch. Speaking immediately would be physically difficult, your voice weak, raspy, and fatiguing after mere minutes. You'd likely experience laryngeal pain and throat strain, requiring months of voice therapy to rebuild vocal stamina and coordination. Psychological reintegration proves even more challenging. The sudden influx of social stimuli would feel overwhelming and exhausting. Many people report physical illness from the intensity of returning to normal social interaction. You might stutter or struggle finding words as those neural pathways slowly reactivate. Social anxiety developed during isolation could take years of therapy to reverse. You'd need to relearn conversation rhythms, when to listen, when to speak, how to read social cues. While voice recovery might eventually be complete with professional intervention, psychological scars could persist indefinitely, fundamentally altering your personality and relationship with both silence and social connection. While this scenario is hypothetical, similar experiences occur in our world with devastating consequences. Prisoners in solitary confinement develop SHU syndrome, severe anxiety, paranoia, and hallucinations after just weeks of isolation. Christopher Knight, the North Pond hermit, lived alone in Maine woods for 27 years and reported losing his sense of identity entirely without social interaction. During COVID-19 lockdowns, mental health professionals documented surges in depression and anxiety directly attributable to reduced social contact, demonstrating how quickly isolation affects psychological well-being. Even supported silence practices like meditation retreats, lasting only 10 days within caring communities, can produce emotional volatility and heightened stress responses. Going 90 days without talking to anyone isn't a peaceful retreat, it's a brutal assault on your biology. You'd suffer vocal muscle atrophy, immune system collapse from chronic stress, and potentially irreversible psychological damage ranging from social anxiety to psychosis. Your brain evolved to connect, and communication isn't a luxury, it's a biological necessity like food, water, and sleep. This experiment should absolutely never be attempted. The risks far outweigh any potential insights, and damage could be permanent. Instead, appreciate the remarkable gift of communication you possess. Every conversation, even brief small talk, supports your brain health, strengthens your immune system, and maintains the social bonds that make us fundamentally human. The next time you chat with a friend, remember, you're not just passing time, you're literally keeping your brain and body alive and healthy.